Are you interested in smart homes and home automation, but unsure which way to go? Have you heard of Home Assistant, but don't really know what it's all about? Watched a few YouTube videos, but been left wondering how to get started? And by the way, just what the hell is YAML? Well, if so, then join the club, because that's pretty much where I am. Hi, I'm Chris, and welcome to the channel. In this, the first of hopefully a series of videos charting my journey into the world of Home Assistant, I'm going to try and answer some of those questions. But let me say right from the start, I'm not an expert or Home Assistant guru, so if you're already using Home Assistant, you're going to know much more than me, and this video probably won't be for you. We'll start off pretty gradually, going step by step, and then as our knowledge and familiarity hopefully increases, we'll be able to up the pace a little. Okay, with that out of the way, what are we going to cover in this episode? We'll start with a very brief intro about what Home Assistant is, and then move on to choosing a hardware platform on which to run it, which in our case will be a Raspberry Pi. After that, we'll go through the installation process, get the system up and running, and do some initial setup. We'll then take a brief look at the Home Assistant desktop, create a new dashboard, and then integrate our very first smart device. And that'll be pretty much it for this one. Better get started then. There are many words you could use to describe Home Assistant, but at its simplest, it's an open source home automation platform that enables users to control and monitor various aspects of their smart home. It allows users to integrate and manage a wide range of devices and services from different manufacturers and is highly flexible and customizable. Using Home Assistant, it's possible to create a unified ecosystem bringing together smart lights, thermostats, security systems, media players and many other smart devices under a single platform. There are many different choices for the hardware platform on which to run Home Assistant. These include hardware offerings from the developers of the Home Assistant software itself, such as the Home Assistant Blue, although that has now been discontinued, and the Home Assistant Yellow. You've then got a range of various small form factor PCs, whether new or refurbished, such as the HP EliteDesk 800 or similar, or indeed Intel NUCs. Alternatively, if you have an existing device like a Synology or QNAP NAS, then these can be used to host virtual machines. Finally, there are multiple options to run virtual machines under a variety of different operating systems, whether that be Windows, Mac OS or Linux. However, perhaps the simplest and most popular approach for newcomers to Home Assistant is to use a Raspberry Pi, which is just as well, as I happen to have a Pi 4 Model B that I bought a couple of years ago, but which until now had sat unopened on a bookshelf. As this video series is very much aimed at complete beginners entering the Home Assistant world, we're just going to focus on installation and operation of Home Assistant on the Raspberry Pi platform. Although I've watched quite a few YouTube videos about Home Assistant, and believe me, there are plenty, I don't think you can beat just following the installation instructions on the Home Assistant website. At least if you're using the Raspberry Pi, that is. So in the next few slides, I'll walk through that process, highlighting any points of note along the way. However, it's pretty straightforward, so even if you haven't done anything like this before, don't be too concerned. We'll soon have Home Assistant up and running. From the Getting Started page, select Installation, whereupon you'll see that there are 4 different installation methods for Home Assistant. As we're using the Raspberry Pi, we're going to follow the recommended installation method and install Home Assistant operating system. The first step is to select the Raspberry Pi guide link to take you to the Raspberry Pi page. At this point, it's worth a quick read through of the suggested hardware section. As my Pi 4 was fresh out of the box and had come with a power supply, that was the first 2 requirements ticked off. I also had a SanDisk Ultra 32GB microSD card to hand, salvaged from a previous mobile phone, and an old USB SD card reader and Ethernet cable left over from previous work and personal projects. Looking good then, so no need to let the moths out of the wallet. The first step of writing the Home Assistant operating system image onto the microSD card is to install the Raspberry Pi Imager software on your PC. To do this, go to the Raspberry Pi website via the highlighted link, whereupon the option to download the Raspberry Pi Imager for Windows, macOS or Ubuntu is displayed. We now need to choose the operating system to be installed on our microSD card. At this point, if you're following the Home Assistant page, there's a handy animated sequence that illustrates the steps of choosing the required operating system. However, it's straightforward enough. Just make sure you choose the Home Assistant operating system that matches your hardware, which in my case was the version for the Raspberry Pi 4/400. Okay, so enough of the slides. Let's run up the Imager and install the Home Assistant operating system onto our microSD card. First, select Choose OS and then scroll down to find Other Specific Purpose OS, then Home Assistance and Home Automation, and then Home Assistant. Now choose the appropriate version of the operating system. If you've not already done so, insert your SD card into your PC or card reader, but be aware that anything on the card will be overwritten, so this is your last chance to save any photos or other stuff that might still be on it. Choose Storage Device, select the SD card that you've inserted, and then select Write. You can now sit back and relax whilst the Imager goes to work. First it will write the operating system, and then, once it reaches 100%, it will go back and verify everything that it's written. It's at this point that I encountered my first small problem, but more of that in a minute. Once the verification has been successfully completed, the Imager finalises the card ready for use in your Raspberry Pi, and then it's ready to be removed. Once you've done this, click Continue and you're done. Okay, some more on that problem I had. Although the writing sequence completed okay, when it came to the verification sequence, it would continually fail at or around 98% complete. At first I wondered if it was the SD card itself, but given that it was relatively new and hadn't been causing any issues when in the mobile phone, I also began to suspect the USB card reader. To be honest, it was getting pretty long in the tooth. Frustrated at falling at this first hurdle, I quickly rushed off some of my hard-earned washers in the direction of Uncle Jeff at Amazon and was quickly delivered of a new microSD card and reader. Okay, they only came to a shade under £13, so not exactly expensive. I've included links in the description below. Turned out it was the old SD card reader that was the culprit, so a few minutes later I had a freshly installed OS all ready to get started. Take the microSD card out of the reader and insert it into the Raspberry Pi. Plug in an Ethernet cable that is connected to your network, usually at the back of your router, and connect up the Raspberry Pi power supply to start it running. Now, at your PC's browser, enter the address to connect to Home Assistant, which is homeassistant.local:8123. Again, all of these steps are clearly set out on the Home Assistant website, so you should soon have Home Assistant installed and accessible, wherein the preparation screen will be shown. Depending on your hardware, this step may take some time, during which the only sign of activity is the pulsing blue circle. I think it took about 15 minutes or so on my Pi 4, so I'd suggest you go and get yourself a cuppa so you're all ready to enter the initial information in the next step. However, first time I tried this, I just could not get my browser to connect to Home Assistant. Tried a different browser, no luck. Restarted the Pi a couple of times, still no luck. Eventually I began to wonder whether there was a problem with the Ethernet connection to my router. Tried a different cable. Hey presto, all worked as it was supposed to. Needless to say, that old cable was quickly consigned to the recycling pile. After a while, you'll be prompted with the dialog to create a user account. As before, the Home Assistant website takes you step by step through this process and is fairly straightforward. However, I think it would help if it was a little clearer as to the difference between name and username, but that's a pretty minor criticism, all things considered. First, we need to enter our name, username and a suitable password, and then select Create Account. Next, we give our Home Assistant installation a name. In my case, I've used my channel name, and then select our country. I could probably have typed UK rather than laboriously scrolling down the list, but hey ho. We can click on Detect to automatically set up where we live, but I chose to manually scroll across the North Sea and find my way to cloudy Ormskirk. Choose your currency, make any changes to your unit system if needed, and then select Next. Now we can choose what information we're willing to share. In my case, I've enabled all 4 types, as I don't see any disadvantage in doing so, and then we select Next again. Home Assistant is now showing various devices it's found on my network, including my EE broadband hub and my Samsung laser printer. One of the devices most of interest is that indicated by a G sign with the H5075 text below it. This is a Govee smart thermohygrometer capable of measuring and recording temperature and humidity. We're going to be integrating this a little bit later in the video, so we won't do it now and instead select Finish, whereupon we're presented with the Home Assistant web interface and the overview dashboard. We can see that by default there are 2 dashboards set up after the onboarding process has finished, i.e. Overview and Energy. In later videos we'll focus more on the Energy dashboard, but for now we can see that the Overview dashboard is displaying 2 cards, one showing user information and one with the local weather. So that's it, Home Assistant is installed, up and running and ready for use. At this point, I'll be honest and say I was a little underwhelmed with the default dashboard view, having seen lots of impressive user dashboards in various YouTube videos and on the Home Assistant website itself. In retrospect, however, this is probably being a bit unfair, as the 2 cards shown are really the only information that is available to the system at this point. Clearly, there's lots of work to do to get close to something that meets my initial expectations. The first thing I'm going to do is create another dashboard that we can use as we start getting to grips with things. So let's go to Settings and then Dashboards and select Add Dashboard. We'll give it the imaginative title of YouTube Demos and choose an icon to be displayed in the dashboard pane on the left. Select Create and there we have it, another dashboard. Should we have a sudden change of mind and want to edit the title or change the icon, just click on the dashboard title and update the dialog shown. Now just click on Open and our new dashboard is displayed, ready to use. Note how the same user and weather cards as seen on the Overview dashboard are displayed. Now we've created our new dashboard, let's start customizing it and adding some functionality. To do this, we need to go into Edit mode by clicking the vertical ellipsis in the upper right corner. That's the vertical 3 dots to you and me, and selecting Edit Dashboard. At this point, we want to stop Home Assistant from maintaining the dashboard and instead take control ourselves. This will allow us to make changes, add or delete items, move them around, etc. etc. So, select Take Control and then we'll make the simplest of changes by selecting the user info card and clicking the up arrow to promote that card above the weather card. Click Done to exit Edit mode and there we have it, we've edited our dashboard. By flicking back and forth between the YouTube Demos and Overview dashboards, we can see that they're now different. Now none of this is going to radically change my world, but after all, I did say this was a step-by-step video. Well, I think we're finally ready to try integrating a smart device. So let's start with the Govee Smart Thermohygrometer mentioned earlier. Why this? Well, I happen to have a couple, so why not? Actually, I think these are pretty nifty devices, relatively low cost. I think I paid around £13 each, with a good screen and decent mobile app. Now, if you're a regular viewer to this channel, you know I lavish a fair amount of care and attention on my tomatoes, courgettes, etc. And so I have one of these installed in my greenhouse to monitor the conditions. However, being Bluetooth, their one shortcoming is that they have a relatively limited range, so I can usually only connect to the greenhouse Govee if I stand in the kitchen, which is not a lot of use when my Raspberry Pi is connected by a short Ethernet cable to my router on the other side of the house. For this demo then, I've placed my other Govee in the porch, well within the range of the Pi's Bluetooth capability. We'll probably have to return to how we deal with monitoring the greenhouse in another video. Okay then, enough waffle, let's get integrating. First, we'll go to Settings, then Devices and Services, at which point we'll see that Home Assistant has already discovered the Govee Bluetooth integration. Given this, we could just choose to configure it by selecting the Configure button. Before we do that, however, it's worth showing how we could search for an integration more generally. So we'll select Add Integration and start entering Govee, at which point Home Assistant will display any integrations that match the search criteria. We could then select Govee Bluetooth and proceed from there, but instead we'll return to the integration screen and configure from the already discovered integration. Once Home Assistant has created the configuration and found the device, we just need to specify the area in our home where it's located. I've already added Porch as a result of running through this process previously, so we can just select that and finish. Right, let's go back to our YouTube demos dashboard. And shock horror, there's nothing been added to it. What have we done wrong? Well, nothing actually. If we go to the Overview dashboard, we can see the Govee device has been added with a location title of Porch. This is because Home Assistant automatically controls the Overview dashboard and so has populated it with the Govee device we've just integrated. If we want to see the Govee device on the YouTube demos dashboard, we'll need to add it manually. So, into Edit mode and select Add Card. Now, there are various predefined cards we could choose from, but this time we're just going to add things by selecting the appropriate entities. Now don't get too fazed by terminology, we'll build up our knowledge over time. Instead, just find the three entities related to the Govee integration, that's battery, humidity and temperature. Select each one in turn and then continue. Home Assistant will suggest a potential card layout for us, and we can choose to pick something else or just continue and add it to the dashboard. And hey presto, we have a card displaying the Govee information on our new dashboard. Exit Edit mode by selecting Done, and we can sit back and admire our handiwork. Okay, so I'll admit our newly created dashboard with integrated environmental monitoring is not the most visual stunning thing you've ever seen. Let's see if we can improve it, at least a little bit. Back into Edit mode then, and we'll start to edit the card itself. First, let's give it a title, as it would be helpful to know where this information is coming from. Then, let's rearrange the order in which the entity information is being displayed. After all, I want to see temperature first before worrying about battery level. A preview of the updated card layout is shown upper right, so once we're happy, we can choose Save and exit back to the dashboard. Having done that, let's also shuffle our cards about a bit. And when we've done faffing about, we can exit Edit mode. Well, okay, it ain't gonna win the Turner Prize, but it's a bit better. Before we finish with the Govee integration, let's just have a closer look at what information is now available, given I've left Home Assistant running for a few hours. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have no doubt spotted there's a few additional weather-related cards also magically appeared on my dashboard, but we'll come back to those in a future video. For now, if we click on the porch temperature, Home Assistant will display a nice temperature history chart for the last 16 hours or so. We can also show more detail if wished. We can do the same thing with humidity, but I won't bother with battery level, it's not that interesting. Now, maybe I'm being a little controversial here, but in all honesty, what we've achieved so far is not a patch on the functionality that the Govee mobile app offers. But having said that, after only a couple of hours effort, we've managed to create our own customised environmental monitoring solution. It's going to be really interesting to see where we can get to after a bit more work. Time for a brief recap then. If I haven't bored you too much, you'll now hopefully have a better idea of what Home Assistant is and what hardware is needed to run it. You'll also know how to install Home Assistant operating system on a Raspberry Pi, and from there how to go through the onboarding process to get it up and running. If you're lucky enough to actually have a Raspberry Pi to hand, as I believe they're in short supply at the moment, then maybe you're speeding ahead, creating dashboards and integrating new devices like hotcakes. If so, I need to get my skates on and catch up. Before we look at what we'll be covering in future videos, I'll highlight a couple of Raspberry Pi specific issues. The first is that my Pi, in its shiny red and white case, gets pretty warm if left powered on for an extended period of time. For now, I've taken to running it with the case top removed, but I may end up fitting a small heatsink or cooling fan to help. The second is that I've read various posts that report SD cards slowly failing over time, as they're not ideally suited to lots of input-output. This shows itself as read and write speeds degrading to the point where the system can barely function any longer. Currently, this isn't a problem, but as we potentially add more devices, the amount of I/O will only increase. The long-term solution would possibly be to switch from using an SD card to an SSD, so that may well be something to consider in the future. However, for now, we'll just stick with what we've got. There's much more we can do before we need to start worrying about hardware upgrades. If you've made it this far, thanks so much for watching. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and perhaps are now intrigued enough to start delving into Home Assistant yourself. For myself, I've always wanted to do a bit of dabbling with the Raspberry Pi, and like a lot of people, I'm also interested in tracking and reducing my home energy usage. Getting into Home Assistant seemed like the ideal opportunity to combine the two things, and also learn something new along the way. Am I convinced it's the best thing since sliced bread? By no means as yet, but it's early days. It's clearly highly flexible and customizable, but I suspect there's a lot of work ahead to build anything really useful. The key may well be to join the Home Assistant community and benefit from the huge amount of existing knowledge and functionality. Who knows, in time we may even be able to contribute something useful too. Right, before we finish, here's a quick look at what we're likely to be covering in future videos. Hope that looks of interest, so please do subscribe to make sure you don't miss out. If you like the video, please do give it a thumbs up, it really does help. And don't forget to comment. Good or bad, I read them all. That's it then. Thanks again for watching, and hope to see you on the next one. Cheers.